the scent of pot roast, and the cloying sweetness of cheap champagne hung thick in the air of our cramped suburban Toledo living room, a miasma of false celebration that I could feel coating my throat as I stood frozen near the faded floral sofa. The entire congregation of my mother's book club, and our extended family from Cincinnati, a blur of expectant faces, all waiting for my brother Derek to announce his prestigious appointment to the United States Naval Academy, the golden child destined for Annapolis. His letter of acceptance held aloft like a sacred scroll, while my own acceptance letter to the local community college's paralegal program was a crumpled secret in my jeans pocket. Deemed unworthy of mention, but the true evisceration came not from the neglect of my news, but from the active demolition of my spirit, when my mother, her voice dripping with a honeyed venom reserved only for me, clinked her glass and declared for all to hear, "Let's all raise a glass to my son, the future leader, the one who will actually wear a uniform that commands respect." Her eyes then slicing toward me, a cold, dismissive smile on her lips as she continued, "Unlike some, who will spend her life in obscurity, chasing silly little desk dreams, never knowing the weight of real honor, never wearing a symbol of authority that this family can be proud of. Some people are just born to blend into the background, and we must accept that." And the room, for a terrifying second, was silent before erupting in uncomfortable titters and raised glasses to Derek. The heat of 1,000 suns flooding my cheeks as my tears, those traitorous, burning streams of utter shame, began their silent descent, carving paths through my makeup, each drop feeling like a scalding admission of the worthlessness she had just proclaimed. My own mother using the altar of family and achievement to sacrifice what little remained of my teenage dignity, her words echoing in the hollowed out chamber of my chest: "Never succeed, never wear a respectable uniform, amount to nothing," a public decree that felt as binding and final as a judge's sentence. And I stood there, a specter at my own funeral, feeling the foundations of my world, of my very identity as her daughter, crumble into dust beneath the weight of her disdain and the crowd's complicit silence. Until I could no longer bear the pressure in my lungs, forcing me to turn and flee from the living room, past the gleeful eyes of my smug brother, up the stairs to the prison of my childhood bedroom, where I collapsed against the door, my body racked with silent, hiving sobs that stole my breath. The emotional breakdown so complete, I thought I might dissolve into the worn carpet, the shame a tangible cloak I could not remove. And that night, as the house slept, saturated with pride for its son, I made a quiet, tear-swollen decision, staring at the glowing screen of a Greyhound bus website. A one-way ticket from Toledo to Atlanta, purchased with the last of my waitressing tips, a city chosen for its sheer distance and anonymity. A place where no one knew I was the girl who didn't deserve a uniform, the girl who amounted to nothing. And as the bus pulled away at dawn, the familiar skyline shrinking behind me, I whispered a promise into the grimy window. A vow not of shouted revenge but of a silent, relentless assent, a promise that one day, against all her predictions, she would see me standing in a uniform of undeniable authority and respect, and she would finally understand the catastrophic depth of her miscalculation. The Atlanta that greeted me was a humid, roaring beast of concrete and ambition, a stark contrast to the flat, subdued horizons of Ohio, and my first home was a women's shelter downtown. A place of kind-eyed exhaustion and whispered stories, where I learned the profound loneliness of being a single heartbeat in a city of millions, my survival jobs a relentless parade of low-paying humiliations, the graveyard shift at a neon-lit 24-hour diner where my feet ached and my soul shriveled from the constant grease and demanding patrons, the fleeting gig as a house cleaner for a meticulous, scornful woman in Buckhead who would run her white, gloved finger over surfaces I'd just cleaned and sigh with disappointment. The back, breaking work as a seasonal warehouse picker for a major online retailer outside Macon, where the quotas were impossible, and the silence between workers was deafening. Each job a lesson in endurance, each meager paycheck a calculation between a stale sandwich and a bus pass. There were nights in a rented room, so small I could touch both walls, where hunger was a sharp, clawed animal in my gut, and sleeplessness was my only companion. The doubts swarming like gnats. My mother's voice a permanent track, in my mind blend into the background. Amount to nothing, and I would cry those silent tears into a thin pillow. The emotional isolation a colder chill than any winter, feeling utterly broken and adrift in this vast, indifferent America. But within that breakdown, a hardened kernel of resolve began to form. Not a loud, declarative thing, but a quiet, stubborn ember that refused to be extinguished. And I realized my revenge would not be declared in a shout, but built in the silent, incremental hours of discipline that no one would ever witness. My first act of rebellion was a library card from the Atlanta, Fulton Public Library, that majestic temple of quiet possibility, and there, surrounded by the scent of old paper and hope, I began my education in earnest, studying for my GED high school equivalency first, then devouring textbooks on criminal justice, American history, and political science, my fingers tracing the paths of powerful women in government service, while surviving on instant ramen and the unwavering, desperate belief that I could reshape my own destiny. The path I slowly, painstakingly charted for myself was one of layered resilience. I enrolled in online courses from a state university, my laptop fan whirring in the diner's back booth. During my breaks, the screen glowing in the pre-dawn dark of my tiny room. Each completed assignment a silent strike against the prophecy cast over me. And when I finally saved enough for a certified professional legal secretary course, I landed a marginally better job as a file clerk at a sluggish law firm in Midtown, where I absorbed the language of law and procedure like a sacrament, studying the calm authority of the female federal paralegals who sometimes visited, their bearing so different from the chaotic energy of my own home. For years, this was my existence, a monastic dedication to growth, a patience that felt like a geological force, my social life non-existent, my family a ghost. I refused to answer calls from their messages piling up in a voicemail graveyard filled with guilt-laden inquiries about when I'd come to my senses and return home, my entire being focused on a single, distant point of light I alone could see. The first real crack in the darkness came when I passed the civil service exam, my score so high it opened a door I hadn't dared dream of. An entry-level position as a clerk typist for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, in a support division in the Atlanta field office, a job that required a stringent background check. My squeaky, clean, work-obsessed life passed with ease, and suddenly, I was walking into a building that hummed with a purpose I could feel in my bones, surrounded by people who spoke of national security and justice. And though my role was small, it was a foothold on the mountain I needed to climb. I became a sponge, volunteering for overtime, learning every database, staying late to help analysts with their paperwork. My quiet diligence noticed by a senior supervisory special agent, a formidable woman named Sharon who took me under her wing. Seeing not a background, blending girl, but a mind hungry for purpose. And she encouraged me to apply for the FBI's Honors Internship Program, a fiercely competitive gateway that I, to my own astonishment, was accepted into, which then led to a full-ride scholarship to complete my bachelor's degree in forensic accounting at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., a city that pulsed with a power that both terrified and electrified me. My transformation was now accelerating, each step building upon the last with a patient, relentless momentum. I graduated at the top of my class, my quiet intensity having become my greatest asset, and immediately applied to become an FBI special agent, embarking on the infamous 21 weeks of training at the Academy in Quantico, Virginia, a crucible of physical endurance, academic intensity, and psychological fortitude that pushed me to every limit I possessed, and then some. The obstacle courses, the firearms training, the endless legal briefings, the simulated high-pressure scenarios, and in my darkest moments on the grinder, when my muscles screamed and my mind begged for rest, I would hear my mother's voice in the Virginia rain, "Never wear a respectable uniform," and I would push harder, dig deeper, my silence now a weapon, my discipline my armor. The day I stood in my crisp, navy blue FBI Academy uniform, the badge heavy and cool in my hand, the stars and stripes on my shoulder, staring at my reflection in the barracks mirror, was a moment of such profound, quiet victory that no applause could ever match it. I had done it. I had earned a uniform that symbolized the highest ideals of American justice and authority, the very antithesis of the obscurity I was promised. My career was a steady, purposeful climb through the ranks of the Bureau. From a new agent probing white-collar crimes in the Salt Lake City field office, to a role on a counterintelligence task force in New York City, my expertise in forensic accounting making me a valuable asset in untangling complex webs of financial deception, each case a lesson, each successful prosecution a brick in the fortress of my professional reputation, my influence growing not through loud boasts but through consistent, impeccable work, my name spoken with respect in meetings at the J. Edgar Hoover Building in D.C., where I was eventually assigned to a senior role in the Office of Public Affairs. My life a far cry from the hungry, sobbing girl on the Greyhound bus, now a woman who owned a stylish condo in Arlington, Virginia, whose counsel was sought by seasoned agents, who had built a life of substance, authority, and quiet, unassailable dignity, all without a single word of revenge ever uttered to the family that had cast me aside, who only knew through the distant, fuzzy lens of social media and reluctant reports from extended family that I was some kind of government worker in D.C. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday, its origin, a probate lawyer's office in Toledo, flashing on my phone with a cold, fateful insistence, and when I answered, the polite, somber voice on the other end informed me that my father had passed away quietly after a long illness. An illness I had not been informed of, and that, as the executor named in his will, I was required to be present for its reading in person the following week, a stipulation he had insisted upon. The flight back to Ohio was a surreal journey, through a personal archaeology of pain, the landscape outside the plane window morphing from the powerful monuments of the capital to the flat, familiar fields of my childhood, each mile a year peeling back, and I wore not my uniform for this return, but a simple, exquisitely tailored navy pantsuit, my hair pulled back in a severe, professional knot, my posture that of the federal agent I was, a calm, observant presence ready to enter a room not as a supplicant, but as an authority. The law offices of Henderson and Blythe were located in a sterile, glass-paneled building in downtown Toledo, and the waiting room felt like a museum of my past. There sat my mother, older, frailer, her eyes hard and resentful beside my brother Derek, whose own life had taken a less glorious path than Annapolis promised. Middling management career in Cleveland that had left him with a perpetual look of dissatisfaction. And they both stared at me as I entered. Not with warmth, but with a bewildered scrutiny, taking in the confidence of my stride, the quality of my clothes, the unshakable stillness in my gaze, my mother offering a tight, "You look well," before turning away, as if the sight of me was an inconvenience. The lawyer, a Mr. Blythe, ushered us into a wood-paneled conference room, the air thick with unspoken grievances and the faint smell of lemon polish. And after the formalities and expressions of condolence, he began to read my father's last will and testament, a document that bequeathed the family home and its contents to my mother for her lifetime use, described a modest trust fund for the maintenance of the property. And then, with a dramatic clearing of his throat, Mr. Blythe read the clause that would detonate the silent war of my life. And to my daughter, Evelyn Marie Carter, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including, but not limited to the commercial property on Main Street, the investment portfolio held at Merrill Lynch, and the balance of all liquid assets, naming her as the sole executor and heir of this estate, due to her demonstrated integrity, resilience, and strength of character, which I have observed with great, if silent, pride. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum of sound that seemed to suck the very oxygen from the room, before my brother Derek slammed a fist on the table, shouting, "This is a mistake! She walked out! She abandoned us!" But my mother said nothing. She simply stared at me, her face leeching of all color, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrific comprehension, not of the money, but of the words, demonstrated integrity, resilience, and strength of character, a direct, posthumous repudiation of her lifelong narrative. I remained perfectly calm, my hands folded on the polished table, my voice level and clear as I addressed Mr. Blythe. "Thank you. Please proceed with the necessary paperwork. I will ensure my mother is cared for, in the family home per my father's wishes." And then I turned my gaze to her, the woman who had publicly shamed me, who had prophesied a life of obscurity, and in that moment, I saw the first crack in her fortress of disdain, a tremble in her lower lip. It was not enough. The legal process unfolded with methodical efficiency over the ensuing months, me managing everything from Virginia with a cool, professional detachment, instructing the property managers, signing documents, ensuring every tax was paid. My revenge was the sheer, unimpeachable competence of it all, the absolute dignity with which I executed my father's wishes, sending polite, typed letters on official letterhead, never a phone call, never an emotional exchange, my very existence as a poised, successful federal agent, now a fact she could not deny. And I knew through a cousin that my mother was unraveling, haunted by the ghost of my father's silent approval of me, and the terrifying unknown of who I had become. The final, quiet scene of my revenge was orchestrated not by me, but by the demands of my duty. A high-profile cybersecurity conference was being held in Detroit, and I, as part of my public affairs liaison role, was tasked with giving a keynote address on public-private partnership in combating cyber threats, a speech that would be covered by local media. And I knew my family, in their now constant scrutiny of my life, would see the announcements. The morning of the speech, in a hotel suite overlooking the Detroit River, I put on my FBI uniform for the first time in their metaphorical presence, buttoning the crisp white shirt, straightening the tie, clipping the badge to my belt, and slipping on the dark blue jacket, with FBI in bold, yellow letters on the back, the American flag patch on my shoulder, every stitch a testament to the journey, she said, I could never make. I delivered my speech to a packed auditorium, my voice steady, commanding, discussing threat vectors and interagency cooperation. A figure of absolute authority in a uniform that screamed of honor, duty, and respect. And as I concluded to respectful applause, my eyes scanned the very back of the room, and there, in the shadow of the doorway, stood my mother, clutching the arm of my reluctant brother, her face ashen, her hand over her mouth, her body visibly shaking as she took in the sight of me on the stage, in the uniform she had told a room full of people I would never, could never, wear. The weight of her error and my father's hidden faith collapsing upon her in that visible, emotional breakdown she could no longer control. Her silent tears in that dark doorway, a perfect, terrible mirror of my own in that bright living room so many years before. I did not go to her. I did not acknowledge her. I simply gathered my notes, nodded to the conference organizer, and walked off the stage with the measured, purposeful stride of an FBI special agent, the emotional closure washing over me not as a shout of victory, but as a deep, settling peace. The silent strength I had cultivated for over a decade, finally rendering the old poison inert. I had rebuilt myself in the image of my own worth, not hers, and in doing so, had delivered a revenge more complete than any confrontation could ever provide. I had made her witness, in the most public and undeniable way, the magnificent life she had tried so hard to convince me I did not deserve, and I walked away, myself, respect a fortress, my patience having been my guide, my resilience my engine, proving that the quietest revolutions often forge the strongest souls.